This episode of Ham Talk Live is brought to you by Tower Electronics. For connectors, cables, and more, call 920-435-2973 or visit pl-259.com. And by ICOM. Heard it, worked it, logged it. Visit www.icomamerica.com/amateur for more information about ICOM radios.
It's Ham Radio.
Standing in the snow with a brand new radio, catching the ISS, satellites are the best. Update on the roof, repeater down the street. What fun it is to make contacts with everyone I meet. Oh, radio, radio, cute and folks one day. I like to get all the gifts around the USA. Hey, radio, radio, cute and folks one day. I like to get all the gifts around the USA.
Hey, good evening, everyone. It's time for Ham Talk Live, episode number 240. Is new Helical antenna recorded live on Thursday, December 17th, 2020. I'm your host, Neil Rapp, WB9VPG. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Ham Talk Live. Tonight we're joined once again by John Portune, W6NBC. And we'll take your calls live in just a few minutes. Last week here on the show, Steve Molo, KI4KWR from Gigaparts, was here to talk about some holiday gift ideas for hams. If you missed that, you can listen anytime at hamtalklive.com or on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. And you can catch the rebroadcast on WTWW, that's 5085 AM, Saturday afternoons at about 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Lots of stuff going on the air this month. We have the 12 Days of Christmas special event going on now through Christmas, and then the Christmas birthday event from Lou and Sally. Lou has I think it's Lou that has the December 25th birthday. So they'll be celebrating that, and then the Santadettes are going on. CQSanta.com is one of those you can check out. And then Yoda Month is at the halfway point, and they're up to like 60, maybe 70,000 QSOs right now. So they're well on track to beat the record from last year. So lots of stuff going on, and we're going to talk tonight about an antenna that you might even be able to disguise it as a winter decoration. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So get your questions ready to go for John. If you're listening to us live on Thursday night, give us a call after the interview is over by calling 859-982-7373. I'll give you that number again several times before it's time to call in. So we'll let you know that. Later on in the show, you can also tweet us. It's at Ham Talk Live on Twitter. You can fire that whenever you want, and I'll check that as we have time this evening. But again, the number for later on in the show is 859-982-7373. Just have that ready to go, and we'll let you know when it's time. We'll talk a little bit with John about the antenna and give you a little background first before we open it up for questions. So we'll do that a little later on in the show. So I'll be back with John right after this word from Tower Electronics right here on Ham Talk Live.
Is this getting serious?
I think so.
Well, how do you feel about it? Just imagine if you hadn't run out of PL259s.
Just imagine if your connectors weren't from Tower Electronics.
Consider the sophisticated quality of connectors from Tower Electronics. Their silver-plated in connectors are so good, they've even been used on the International Space Station.
I'm not so sure why I ever used any other PL259s.
Mine are better. Besides, you deserve the best. You know I love you.
Don't be caught without PL259s. Visit Tower Electronics at a Hamfest near you, or visit them online anytime at pl-259.com or call 920-435-2973. They also have ham sticks, mobile antennas, and meters too. See the whole catalog. Go to pl-259.com. Tower Electronics, the ham's dime store since 1978.
All I want for Christmas is to listen to another episode of Ham Talk Live.
Welcome back to Ham Talk Live. Tower Electronics is back out on the Hamfest trail as COVID permits. Their schedule right now looks like tailgate in Orlando on January 16th, rather. Jack Moyer's tailgate. Arcadia, Florida Hamfest, January 23rd. Dalton, Georgia, February 27th. But you can catch them anytime, anywhere at pl-259.com. So thanks to Tower Electronics for sponsoring the show once again tonight. And we welcome you back. John Portune is our guest tonight. He joins us on the Orlando Amateur Radio Club and Hamcation Zoom line tonight. And John's call is W6NBC. And he's been a ham since 1965. He's active from 160 meters to 2.4 gigahertz, and helps people get licensed and new licensees. He manages a remote base on HF and VHF on Vandenberg Air Force Base, and does a lot of local 2-meter and 40-meter mobile from his RV. And he's married to KF6OEB and has 3 married children, 12 grandchildren. He retired in 2002. Spent most of his time working for, yeah, you guessed it, KNBC TV in Los Angeles, and also Ampex Corporation and Sony Electronics. He frequently writes for QST and other ham radio publications, including How to Deal with HOAs and Antennas. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight is one of his latest antenna creations. So, John, welcome back to the show. Thanks for coming back.
Oh, my pleasure, Neil. Very happy to be here.
Well, this new antenna, I have to give a little background here because I first asked John, hey, do you have, because you're always coming up with all these different ideas for antennas. And I said, do you have any Christmas antennas? Do you have anything? You're like, well, no, but I've got this new helical copper tape antenna, and immediately when I go to the website and take a look at a picture of this, it's wrapped around this PVC pole, and it looks just like the North Pole. So I think, or a peppermint stick. So I'm thinking this is a Christmas themed antenna. I don't know if that was what you thought, but I think a little red on that copper tape, and nobody would ever know.
And maybe an elf hat.
Yeah, put a little elf hat on top of it. Well, you're always coming up with these great ideas on how to kind of make these antennas blend in. So tell us a little bit of the backstory on how this, and by the way, this is the most recent QST article, or I like to call it sometimes Q Street. Give us some of the background on how this idea came about and how this all worked.
Yeah, well, this is a bit of a ham war story, and since we can't show you how to build one of these on radio, even though I like radio as a medium, a bit of the anecdote of the background of it. At my pre-COVID weekly ham breakfast, my good buddy KF6, not KF, but W6 OEK, confusing my wife's call sign in there. W6 OEK, Jim Bailey, who helps me a lot with articles, and I were just kicking the bull around one morning, and the question came up, what kind of articles does QST like the best? And I thought about this, and now with this latest article, that's just 27 articles in QST, so I do have some experience. I said it's obvious. They like simple, build-it articles. So we kind of brainstormed there over breakfast, one of the last breakfasts we had. And on the way home, I let the thinking cap work. And when I got home, in 2 hours, I had the antenna built. In 2 more hours, I had the article written and put in the mail off to QST. And as little as a week later, they sent me a letter back saying they accepted it. It's an absolute record. Most of my articles, of the 27 of them in QST, have taken up to a year between the time I wrote the article and they got in the magazine. Not this one. Well, this one is built out of, and if you haven't seen it and haven't looked at it, you should, because it's unusual. It appeared in the October issue, which is that black one with the ham boot cap on the front. Hams love PVC pipe and copper pipe. So I figured you got to make the simplest antenna in the world out of PVC pipe and copper pipe. A good buddy at breakfast and I, we have this standing joke. The ham who dies with the most PVC pipe wins. So that's what this one is. It's made out of copper tape, actually snail tape, the kind of tape you get at a garden store and put around your planters to keep the snails from crawling up and eating your begonias. So or you can buy it anywhere. It's on the internet. It's readily available for RF shielding and other things. 1 inch wide copper tape, 1.25 inches PVC, and it's only 18 inches tall. Yet it's almost as good as a J-pole. That's the background to it.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about the theory behind this, because you've got this thing just twisted around, and it really does look like a peppermint stick. And I sent out a picture of it on our social media site. So if you don't have the QST article handy, you can take a look at that, or John's website at w6nbc.com. But you can see that it looks like just a ribbon wrapped around a pole. That's it. So let's talk a little bit about how in the world you get this to tune and get this working.
Well, the antenna is basically a coil loader, a loading coil shortened vertical, a half-wave vertical. It's pretty straightforward. Most hams know what that is. But instead of being discretely loaded with a closely wound wire loading coil, it's continuously wound. So the antenna and the loading coil are all one piece. The copper tape, being 1 inch wide, is good conductivity. And if we have some time to talk about it, we can talk about efficiency. That gives the antenna high efficiency. And the spacing helps with skin effect loss. But what's interesting about this antenna, I think, and this is a ham tip that a lot of hams don't know this, but I've found this out with EasyNeck modeling. EasyNeck, by the way, is my favorite piece of ham software. If you don't know how to run EasyNeck, learn how if you're an antenna person. Anyway, one of the basic principles that this antenna embodies is how easy it is to match a small antenna. Bigger antennas are more difficult. Now, we all know that a dipole, a wired dipole out in free space, has a center feed point impedance of 72 ohms. And that's fine. That's not a perfect match, though, to 50 ohm coax. But if you make that antenna shorter by putting loading coil in it or making it continuously loaded, like this little antenna is, the center impedance is now much lower In the case of this antenna, something around 25 ohms. But what impedance is there at the end of this antenna? Well, most hams know that the ends of a dipole, the impedance is high, the voltage is high, the current is low. The impedance out at the end of an antenna of a dipole can be several thousand ohms. This means that for any small antenna, any size reduced antenna, there are two 50 ohm points, partly off center. And that's exactly what's used in this particular antenna. The top of the antenna is 3.5 turns, and the bottom of the antenna is 4.5 turns. It's an off-center fed dipole. Either one of to the side of the middle of this antenna, short distance by about 1 turn, you'll find 50 ohms naturally. You can hook the coax to it, and you don't need any other magic. That's what's handy about small antennas. And I use this principle all the time. Anyway, so that's the one of the basic theory points in this antenna.
Well, you mentioned that you could modify this for HF, and that's going to make it a bigger antenna. So let's talk about some suggestions for our listeners if you want to try to turn this into an HF antenna and make some of those modifications. And I know you want to kind of keep track of some of that. So talk a little bit about making this a bigger antenna.
Of course. And this is really what I'm really interested in. It's a very good little 2-meter antenna, but I'm most interested in seeing what can be done with it on lower frequencies. I know for sure it will be fairly easy to take it down to 6 meters. Because all you have to do is increase the dimensions of an antenna, lengthen it, and you can take it down in frequency. I would recommend, if anybody wants to try this, and I have one fellow who's working on a 40-meter version of it. Here's my recommendation if you want to make this antenna for a lower frequency. Stay with the same size tape and the same size spacing. By the way, the spacing is to reduce skin effect loss between adjacent turns. Coil turns don't like to be next to each other. They cause skin effect loss and make the conductivity higher for greater inefficiency. But if you're going to make it for a lower frequency, use the same 1-inch tape. It's about equivalent to 1/2-inch copper tubing, so it's nice. It's very conductive. It's very conductive material. And so the efficiency can stay high. Just make the pole bigger in diameter. A 6-meter one, you might make it on 3-inch PVC pipe instead of 1.25 inches. And of course, make it longer. Where do you start? Very simply, put on the pipe 80% of the half wavelength. So if the wavelength, let's say, is 6 meters, half of the half wavelength is 3 meters. That's about 10 feet. Put about 8 feet of tape on the pipe. That'll get you in the ballpark. It'll be too long still, but that's a good starting point. And then start whacking tape off. It's easy to do. Just cut it off the top until you get a good SWR. Then cut it off both ends until you get it tuned up. It's a very easy antenna to tune. So that's some of the basics of putting it on another band. I think it'll go easily to 10 meters and 12 meters. I'm going to try a 20-meter version here one of these days.
Okay, now I'm going to throw you the curveball, John.
Sure.
Let's say I want to add red to this. What? I've been running through some ideas on what I would use to do that, but what are your ideas? If I want to make that copper look red and make it disguised as the North Pole,
I don't know. I think I might over tape it with 1-inch plastic electrical tape. That might do it. I can't. Nothing comes off the head. I can't think of spray painting it. That sounds rather difficult. You can paint this antenna if you want to, but I don't have any ideas, so I'm open. If you've got some ideas, I welcome them.
Well, you're close. I was thinking maybe ribbon.
Well, yeah, that might work. at least for the holiday season. Yeah, get some nice 1-inch ribbon from the local sewing store and just tape it on. Since this is wound on helically in a nice uniform helix, it would be easy to wind the ribbon on in the same way, and a little bit of Gorilla tape should hold it on fine.
And then the other thing I thought of was maybe like some red cellophane, kind of like a 1-inch. Put it in 1-inch strips, and then you can disguise it. Which why go with this antenna instead of a J-pole? Is it just to make it less obvious?
Yeah, I think there are several distinct advantages to it. First of all, the classic homebrew copper pipe J-pole, the favorite antenna of homebrew hams of all times, the famous copper half-inch pipe J-pole. That antenna is 5 feet tall. And this antenna is 18 inches tall. And the gain is only half a dB less than that J-pole. So it certainly is far stealthier. Your neighbors might even think you opened up a barber shop. The other thing is
I think it could work.
It's extremely lightweight, too. Doesn't weigh more than a couple of pounds. So if you're out at a bike-a-thon or a mobile event where you go out to help out for net control, this makes a great antenna for net control, because you can also build it in one piece so that the mast and the antenna are a single integrated piece. You don't just have to build it 18 inches long. You build it 6 feet long if you want, and just put it up at the top of a single piece. No clamps, no nothing. Very lightweight. You can carry it along. Maybe use it as a walking stick while you're walking around at the bike-a-thon. So that's one of the distinct advantages. And it's cheap as heck. If you amortize the cost of this antenna, even if you have to buy a bit more stuff, which you usually do to build anything, but the amortized cost of this antenna is under $10, even including the pigtail and the coax and everything else you use for it. It uses a little 8-foot-long RG59 or Mini 8 coax pigtail, which can hook direct to an HT, or I would recommend using heavier coax beyond it back into the shack just to minimize loss. And there's a ballon. The ballon is easy to make. You just wind some turns of the RG58 and shove it up in the end of the pipe and put a cap on the end to hold it in. And it's a terribly easy antenna to make, but quite efficient and good gain. Same gain as a J-pole, basically, only half a dB less.
Well, there you go. That's more ingenuity from John Portune, W6NBC. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk with John. We'll talk maybe a little more about the efficiency and talk about disguising antennas, and take your calls and your questions at 859-982-7373. So I'll be back with John right after this word from ICOM right here on Ham Talk Live. Ham for the holidays. ICOM's new ID52A and IC705 give hours of fun and enjoyment working your favorite bands this holiday season. ICOM's newest handheld amateur radio is the ID52A. Larger radio, larger color display, and louder audio. This VHF UHF digital transceiver is much more than just a replacement for the ID51, but also a new way of communicating. This color display is 2.3 inches for exceptional viewability, and the audio is 80% louder. This multifunction dual-band D-Star transceiver supports DR mode for easy access to local repeaters based on internal GPS information, as well as terminal and access point modes. The ID52A also has Bluetooth for audio and data control, providing improved mobility and control. And for the first time in the amateur radio industry, you can now send photos from a connected Android device. Other features include wideband receiver with a guaranteed range of 144 to 148 and 440 to 450 megahertz. VHF on both bands, UHF on both bands, and one of each with the dual DV mode. Integrated GPS with grid square locator, micro SD card slot, micro USB for data transfer, programming, and charge, and it's IPX7 waterproof. The ID52A is the perfect companion to the IC705. Both use compatible batteries and headsets, and you can use the same Android app for D-Star operation. The IC705 is the perfect sidekick for hams that like to enjoy what both the great indoors and outdoors have to offer. It's the perfect QRP companion. Base station features and functionality at the tip of your fingers in a portable package covering HF, 6 meters, 2 meters, and 70 centimeters. This compact rig weighs in at just over 2 pounds with RF direct sampling for most of the HF band and IF sampling for frequencies above 25 megahertz. It has a 4.3-inch touchscreen with live band scope and waterfall, 5 watts with the battery BP272 or 10 watts with a power supply, sideband CW, AM, FM, and full D-Star functions with a touchscreen, micro USB connector, Bluetooth, wireless LAN, integrated GPS and GPS logger, a micro SD card slot. The speaker mic HM243 comes standard and supports QRP operations. And the perfect accessory for the 705 is the optional backpack LC192 with a special compartment for your IC705 and room for accessories for soda activations or a day in the park, and it's shipping now. Visit icomamerica.com/amateur for more information on ICOM radios.
Join the conversation. Give us a call at 859-982-7373. Again, the number to call is 859-982-7373. Or, if you'd rather type than talk, tweet us at Ham Talk Live. Now, here's Neil Rapp with more Ham Talk Live. Ham Talk Live. The longer you listen, the later it gets.
Welcome back to Ham Talk Live. Thanks to ICOM America for sponsoring the show. Check them out at icomamerica.com/amateur. Ham Talk Live is on the air every Thursday night at 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here at hamtalklive.com. Be sure to check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And as we've been doing here the past few weeks, we do have a ham radio joke of the week. So we'll do that. It's time for that right now with N9 GSU.
Now it's time for the Ham Talk Live Ham Radio Joke of the Week, the part of the show where Rick tells us a ham radio joke. The Ham Talk Live Ham Radio Joke of the Week is brought to you by QRM Labs. Now, here's Rick Garrett in 9 GSU with today's Ham Talk Live Joke of the Week.
As I've gotten older, I find I'm very sensitive to high-pitched sounds. When I hear them, it hurts.
This has been the Ham Talk Live Ham Radio Joke of the Week with Rick Garrett in 9 GSU. Tune in again next week for another joke from Rick.
Oh, there we go. That's another joke from Rick. Well, we're going to go back to the antennas. If you have a question for John Portune, W6NBC, give us a call at 859-982-7373. Now is the time to call. 859-982-7373. Or tweet us. It's at Ham Talk Live on Twitter. If you are on Spreaker, you can type a comment in. We'll see that. And if you're listening to us on WTWW or on the podcast edition, you won't be able to reach us. We're doing this live on Thursday night. So we've talked about, disguising some of these antennas. Let's talk a little bit about the efficiency and the radiation pattern off of this thing, John.
Okay, the radiation pattern straightforward. It's a dipole, a shortened dipole. So it has the same basic radiation pattern as a vertical dipole. the classical donut-shaped radiation horizontally, and omnidirectional. If you look down on top of it, so that's and with a gain of 1.6 dBi compared to 2.1, and the same radiation pattern of a J-pole, which is basically a dipole. The bottom section of a J-pole does not radiate. Efficiency-wise, this antenna is good, and I set out in designing this one to be sure it was. That's why I used the wide copper tape. It has low ohmic resistance, and that's important, very, very, very important for small antennas. Any of you who have ever played around with the so-called magnetic loop, I don't like that term, I like calling them compact transmitting loops, know that you need to make them out of big copper conductors if you want them to work well, because they suffer from efficiency losses due to one phenomenon. Now, here's a little theory. If you draw the diagram, the equivalent diagram of any antenna, it has four things in it: a coil and a capacitor, distributed inductance, distributed capacity. That's what makes it resonant at a given size. But it also, in series with the coil and the capacitor, are two resistances. R sub C, we call it, or conductor resistance. That's just the plain ohmic resistance of the copper or the aluminum. The other is an entity called radiation resistance. Hams have vaguely heard of the term, but not a lot of hams really understand what radiation resistance is. Just a brief word on that. Radiation resistance is a real resistance. It's measured in ohms, but it's a virtual resistance caused by the loading of space around an antenna. Space is not unreal. Empty space is not unreal. It's very definitely real. It's one of the four basic constituents of the universe: matter, space, time, and energy. Empty space, even if it's got no matter, no energy in it, is still real. The reason is it loads an antenna. That's what Hertz and Maxwell discovered back in the 1850 times. It's the loading of space. I like to imagine it as a bowl full of jelly. The whole universe is a big bowl full of jelly, rubbery jelly. And when the RF that comes out of your radio shakes the electrons in your antenna, it shakes that bowl full of jelly. It resists the flow of the shaking electrons that are making radio waves. If it wasn't there and if it wasn't real, an antenna would not radiate. This is a metaphor, but I like the metaphor of a bowl full of jelly. And hey, Neil, that ties up with Christmas.
There you go.
His belly shook like a bowl full of jelly.
You read my mind.
Anyway, but consider those two resistances that exist in all antennas: conductor resistance and radiation resistance. Now, for big antennas, the conductor resistance is reasonable, but the radiation resistance is quite high. And when the RF from your transmitter passes through those two resistances, the conductor resistance makes wasted heat, but the radiation resistance is where the RF energy goes. It makes radio waves. So we want the radiation resistance to be high compared to the conductor resistance. That's why we made this antenna out of wide copper tape, or why you make magnetic loops out of big fat copper tubing, because their radiation resistance is low. Any small antenna has a low radiation resistance. There's less jello around it. So it isn't resisted as much by space. So it has a low radiation resistance. If you want an antenna to be efficient, you have to have a high radiation resistance compared to the ohmic resistance. It's a ratio between the two. And in this antenna, it's good. The wide copper tape compared to the approximate 30 ohm radiation resistance has much less conductor resistance than 30 ohms. So that's why we made it this way. And that's how we get it to be an efficient antenna.
And an antenna is just not an antenna if it's not somewhat efficient. It's just, if it's not going to work, don't bother. Well, Chris, right. AA4CB has a question. We've talked about making this bigger and getting it into the HF bands, but Chris wants to go the other direction. He wants to know, could this be scaled to use on UHF, maybe on 440?
Oh, why, of course. You can buy this copper tape in virtually any size you want. You can, in fact, use aluminum tape if you want. Aluminum is not that much less conductive than copper. And I know the 99-cent store, for example, sells aluminum tape. I use it for lots of things. But the copper is a little better, so I just used it. And I think a 440 antenna made maybe on a piece of 3/4-inch PVC pipe out of 1/2-inch copper tape, spaced 1/2 inch apart to keep the adjacent turn skin loss down, would work just fine. And you tune it up the same way. Whack off the top for a good SWR, whack off both ends to get the frequency tune. Straightforward. Tune it up with an antenna analyzer very quickly.
Okay, Chris, there you go. Maybe that's a project for you to get this going over on 70 centimeters. Well, if you have a question, give us a call at 859-982-7373 or tweet us. It's at Ham Talk Live. Or you can do like Chris did and leave a comment here on Spreaker, and we'll pick that up. And we'll get all your questions answered here. We've got a little bit longer to go. One thing that I wanted to talk to you about. Let me see. He says, I'm cheap. I'll slice the tape in half the width. Okay. So, one thing that I want to talk about, and we've talked about it on this show before, is just kind of remind people about dealing with HOAs and trying to get permission to put up an antenna that maybe isn't quite so stealthy. Of course, you've got some options, some great options for stealthy antennas, so they may not know any better. But just remind everybody some of the points that you made, because I think you made some great points about ways to deal with the HOAs in this kind of situation.
Oh yeah. Well, my main key, I have two main keys in dealing with HOAs. First of all, make antennas that don't look like antennas. Lots of loading coils and traps and, and capacity hats and stingers sticking out in all sorts of directions. It's a dead giveaway. But make it look like a flagpole or make it look like a bird nest. The antenna I've got in my backyard, which is an HF double inverted delta, it doesn't look like an antenna. It looks like a ship's mast. In fact, I always want to hang flags on it. Make your antennas so they don't look like antennas, and make them look like they belong on your roof. You can disguise it as a vent pipe, or to me, these are important issues. That's why I have another antenna that may come out in a very soon in PQST. It's an inverted Delta 6-meter antenna. I've got flags hanging on it. And as long as you hang patriotic flags on your antennas, people don't think they can't tell you to take them down.
Well, and there's a good approach too, that if you do go to them and are trying to ask permission, there's an approach to take.
Well, I don't know that I have any magic formulas about the right approach. Obviously not clobbering them over the head with regulations that the government has. Yes, there are regulations about it. I think if you actually want to enter into conversations with your HOA people, it's got to be about the fact that whatever you do, you're sensitive to the way things look, just as they are. and that you'll be cooperative. But that's just what comes off the top of my head.
Yeah, that's what I was going for, was don't clobber them over the head with all this stuff, because, if you go in and be cooperative and try to work with them, I think your chances are a whole lot better. So that's what we were going for.
Yeah, I've got five antennas right now on my mobile home. And we're heavily antenna restricted. Deeds of covenant saying no antennas, no transmitting. Yet I've got 5 of them sitting out there. Not one of them looks like an antenna. And if it's out there, it's buried in a tree, or it's lost in the backyard, or it's hidden in a vent pipe, or it's got flags flying on it. I thought one of the cutest decorations to put on an antenna. We don't have them in this area, but back on the East Coast, there's a particular swallow. Forget what it's called, a blue something or other. And they like to nest in these little gourd-shaped nests. And this guy has several of them hanging on his antenna to disguise it. And when the neighbors say, "What's that?" he says, "Oh, that's a roosting place for the swallows."
So blending in is always a way to make that work, and you've come up with all kinds of creative ideas for doing that. So, John, I think we're about out of time here, so I'll let you make any final comments, and then we're going to get going. And we do have something a little special tonight as we sign off, so we'll get to that here in a minute. But any final comments here before we go?
Nope, just to tell you that you can reach me at Portune. That's my last name, Portune, Portune, at AOL.com, or you can contact me through my website, W6NBC.com, where most of these articles are posted. I always put the QST articles up there later. And just to give a shameless plug here, and now for these important announcements.
Yes.
Many of you, that's my radio day sticking out. Many of you may not know that I recently published an Amazon Kindle book, Slot Antennas for Ham Radio. If you're interested in it, and that's, of course, been my real love for 3 years, is slot antennas. I decided to write it down as a book. It's inexpensive on Amazon.com. Just go to Amazon.com, search for Kindle book, Slot Antennas for Ham Radio. And I think you'll find some designs in there that you might find useful.
All right. Very good. Well, we got the shameless plug in, and thank you for that. And I'm sure that's some excellent information. So we'll have to check that out. Well, thank you so much for coming back. We appreciate it. And we'll look forward to the creative idea you have next time.
All the best 73s, which you shouldn't say.
Well, that is a wrap for this week's edition of Ham Talk Live. Thanks to my guest, John Portune, W6NBC, and everybody out there in cyberspace for listening and typing in, rather. We had typing in tonight. And invite you back in 2 weeks on Thursday, January 7th at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. I'm going to take Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve off, so it'll be 2 weeks before we're back. But Thursday, January 7th, I'll be back with another episode, and you can find our upcoming guests over at hamtalklive.com. And if you like the show, please leave us a review. That'll help others find us faster. And so we're going to sign off here tonight. But first, we're going to close this show with a clip from episode number 44, where Brian Lynn, KD0HII from the Christian Amateur Radio Fellowship Net, talked about the meaning of 7-5. So since it's almost Christmas, I thought that was worth listening to again. So it's just a couple of minutes. So we're going to close with Brian from episode 44, So for now, this is Neil Rapp, WB9VPG, saying 7375. And may the good DX be yours. And Merry Christmas to all, and to all, a good night. So, Brian, we've been talking for a few weeks here on email, and I kind of told you a little bit of the story here. When I started doing the show in February, I started off with coming up with, some of the things that I wanted to do, some little catchphrases and stuff. And so one of the things I always did was I signed off with both 73 and 75. And then, may the good DX be yours. Now, may the good DX be yours is kind of a play on the old WKRP in Cincinnati newsman Les Nessman that always signed off with may the good news be yours. So I kind of changed that around. And as hams, we know what 73 means. It's best wishes, but a lot of people have asked me, and I admit I did this on purpose, what 75 means, and I've had people go and look up all these old Western Union message codes and everything, and they're like, we can't find anything about 75. We can't find anything about 75. What does 75 mean? So tonight I thought I would finally reveal on the show, although I've answered a few emails here and there, what 75 means, and you're the guy to fill everybody in on this. So tell our audience what 75 means and what its history is.
Well, you certainly have gotten the same question we have received a number of times. 75 means, may God bless you and yours. And you're right, it's an addition to the old telegraphy codes popular in the 19th century. The neat thing is, if you're doing this with a key, it's 10 quick keystrokes versus over 60 if you spell it out. So obviously, telegraphers benefit there to use that. We don't know how far back it goes. The CARF group has been around for 50 years. It was started at the North American Christian Convention in Louisville, Kentucky, 1966. There are 50 hams, members in that original year. 31 of those now have gone on to be silent keys. But I had the opportunity to speak with one the other night, one of our original founding members, and he said 75 has been with the organization as long as he's been with it, which is 50 years. He doesn't remember when we didn't use it, and he also fully believes that it was used by some other organization prior to our using it, but he could not remember back those 50 years. Now, we did look up and see that the first CARF newsletter was signed with 75 back in September of 1966. Thank you so much for having us on, especially here around Christmas time, a very special time for the Christian Amateur Radio Fellowship Net. We thank you very much, Neil.